Please welcome Dr. Sian Proctor, Chief Inspiration Astronaut, Space 2 Inspire.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Yeah. All right, raise your hand if you're a U2 fan. Anyone? Yes, in the back, someone's like, yes. Little hidden gem. The reason why I like to walk out to that song is because that was the song that me and Haley decided to drive to the pad to. And one of the reasons why I chose that song is that I got to speak to Bono for 20 minutes when I was in space. It's a little hidden gem of me going to space. So when you go to space, you can kind of make some outrageous requests. And they said, you get to speak to somebody every day. And we were in orbit for 3 days. And I was like, well, I don't want to talk to my siblings. And they're like, who do you want to talk to? I'm like, I want to talk to Bono. And so I ended up having this amazing conversation with him for 20 minutes while I was up there. But before I get into my presentation, I want to take a moment and just talk about going to space and that childhood dream. So raise your hand if you would go to space. Raise your hand if you'd go to space right now. Now take a look around you and see all the people who, you're like, no. All the people who had their hands up and saying, they're like, yeah, I would love to go to space. And how many of you who raised your hand, that's been a childhood dream since you were, and those that you didn't raise your hand, maybe when you were a child, you were like, I really want to be an astronaut. I want to go to space. Yeah, you're like, no hesitation. That was me, and so now to be able to stand here and share with you my space story is pretty special. And because my life radically changed in 2021 when this happened. The day of launch, I'm going to be thinking about how my entire life has led up to this moment. I was born on the island of Guam, and the reason why I was born there is that my dad worked for the NASA tracking station. And so I feel like space has always been a part of me. When I got that call, that Zoom, and Jared was on there and he said that, they picked me for the Prosperity seat, that I was going to go to space with him and be part of the Inspiration 4, it really was like getting the golden ticket for Willy Wonka. Everything in my life finally came into focus, and I realized that it was all about this moment in time. I won the Prosperity seat for Inspiration 4, and I did that not as a geoscientist or an explorer or an analog astronaut, which are all on my resume. I actually won this as a poet and an artist. We are striving for that Star Trek generation, that idea of a just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive space, or a Jedi space. I'm gonna be the first Black female pilot of a spacecraft ever. And to me, that just blows me away. And I wanna encourage the next generation to dream that this is possible. And a Jedi space, that's what that's about. I'm Dr. Sian Proctor, and I'm the mission pilot for Inspiration 4. Thank you. Now, I want you to imagine that you are about to go to space, and you have to pack for space. I want you to take a moment and I want you to think about what are the 5 things that you feel like if you're packing for space, you would want to bring with you. What are those things? 5 things. Does anybody want to share one thing that they would want to pack to space? Just shout it out. Seasoning. Food in space. How many of you, when you're thinking about packing for space, you're like, man, food? Raise your hand if you're like, the food's got to be good. Like, you're like, yes, food. What else? What else are you going to pack for space?
Photos, something to read, entertainment. Okay, thinking who had movies or entertainment, something to read on their packing list. Photos of family members, right? Things like that. Did anybody have like my significant other or your kids that you'd want to bring them along with you? You know, when you're thinking about packing for space, a lot of times we're thinking, oh, one of the big ones is a camera. Did anybody think, I got to take a camera with me? I want to take all of these photos and stuff. A lot of times when we're preparing for a journey of a lifetime, we're often thinking about the things that we are material, that we're going to be bringing along on that journey. And rarely do we ever consider that the most important thing that you're going to pack for whatever you're doing, whether it's going to space or going on a trip anywhere in the world, the most important thing you're always packing is yourself. And how you got to that moment in time. What is it that made you who you are so that you were able to go on this magical journey of discovery and opportunity? And so when I was packing for space, yeah, I had all those traditional things, but one of the big things, one of the most important things that I started thinking about was me and how my life got me to this moment where my childhood dream was going to come true. And so it started with preparation. In that documentary, that little clip I showed you, it talked about how I was born on the island of Guam. I was born there because my dad was working at the NASA tracking station for the Bendix Corporation. My family was on Guam from 1966 to 1970. And what's interesting about that is that neither of my parents had college degrees, but my dad was like a hidden figure. If you love that movie or that book, you know, my dad was really good at mathematics, and as a result, he was able to get picked up and work at the NASA tracking station during one of the most historic moments in human space flight. And so I am a product of Apollo 11 and Neil Armstrong stepping foot on the moon. I was literally born 8.5 months after Neil Armstrong took those famous first steps. So I am a moon celebration baby. I have a feeling there might be another moon celebration baby in the crowd. If you were born in March or April of 1970, you too are a moon celebration baby. Anybody? Anybody? You're right there. Yes. I'm the youngest of 4. I'm definitely a moon celebration baby. But what was great about that time is that a lot of people don't realize is that after the Apollo 11 crew came back, they did a tour of all the tracking stations around the world, and they came to Guam. And so while I was incubating in my mom's belly, my dad got to meet Neil Armstrong. And if any of you know Neil Armstrong, he was notorious for not giving out his autograph, but he gave my dad his autograph. He wrote, "To Ed, thanks for all the help, Neil Armstrong, Apollo 11. And shortly after I was born, my dad and my family, my dad left human space flight and we whisked off to Minnesota. But I grew up with all of this NASA memorabilia to my dad. And from my earliest age, I wanted to be 2 things, a fighter pilot and an astronaut, because you know, growing up in that right stuff era and thinking about like, how do you get to space? You get to space by you become a military aviator, and then you go off and you become, you know, a pilot. And I was like, oh wow, that's what I want to do. And so as a little girl, my dad and my family really encouraged me to follow those dreams. My dad found this Civil Air Patrol and said, hey, you know, this is an organization that will help you fly and get ready if you want to go into the Air Force. And so I started doing all the things that you needed to do to go down that path. But life often takes you in a completely different direction than you could ever imagine. And when I was about 14 years old, I got glasses. And back then, you couldn't be a military aviator if you didn't have 20/20 vision. And for me, I only saw my path forward to becoming an astronaut through the lens of the military. It never occurred to me that there were other paths. But those are the things sometimes we don't realize. But my dad instilled in me and my siblings the idea that education can make a difference in your life. So I went off and I became Dr. Proctor. And that photo on the right was the day I graduated from Arizona State University with my PhD. But my dad also, because he didn't have degrees, encouraged me to be invested in lifelong learning. So right after I got my doctorate at 35, at 36, I went off and got my pilot's license because I always wanted to fly. And I started teaching at the community college. I've been a geoscience professor there now for 26 years full time. But I went off and I got scuba certified. I traveled and taught around the world. And so I'm living this life of an explorer. And what I didn't realize was I was packing my preparation. I was becoming the person that I needed to become for opportunity. And then I was 38 years old when I got an email. The email said, NASA's looking for astronauts, you should apply. Imagine now that childhood dream that other people are looking at you and the life that you're living and saying, NASA's looking for astronauts, you should apply. And I was like, whoa, why? First thing in my head that I thought was, they're never gonna take me. I'm just a community college professor, right? Because that's the voice inside our head fueling us with doubt. But then I thought about what my dad said. My dad would say to me, don't talk yourself out of opportunity. Let somebody else determine whether you're qualified. And so in 2008-9, I applied for the NASA astronaut selection process. And that year, just around 3,500 people applied. And you go through the selection process that's a year long. And you imagine one day you find out that you've now made the highly qualified list on the NASA astronaut selection process. And you start thinking, wow, wait a second. NASA thinks I'm qualified to be an astronaut. And then your phone rings one day and it's Johnson Space Center and they say, hey, we would like to invite you down for first round interviews. And you're like, oh my God, this is crazy. And you arrive. And that photo was taken the day we came, and you come in groups of 10 or 11, and you're surrounded by amazing people, fighter pilots and MIT research scientists and doctors, and you're like, people say, well, what do you do? And you're like, well, I'm a community college professor in South Phoenix. And again, that imposter syndrome is like, what am I doing here? And you're just surrounded by this awesomeness. And if you can see, there's actually 2 NASA astronauts in that photo with me. Anybody know? Mark, yep. And he got selected that year in 2009. And then on the end next to me, anybody recognize her? Jessica Meir. In that photo. She didn't get selected that year, she got selected the next round. So you're surrounded by these amazing people and you're like, oh yeah, you should be an astronaut. You should definitely be an astronaut. And then you go home after this first round of 3 days at Johnson Space Center and you wait. You wait for that next phone call. Are they gonna invite you back? And I'm thinking, there's no way they're not gonna invite me back. But then my phone rings and it's Johnson Space Center and they're like, hey, we'd like to invite you back again for a full week. But this time, you're gonna be a finalist for the NASA astronaut selection process if you make it through that week without being medically eliminated. So I flew back to Johnson Space Center, spent the week, had this amazing experience, and then I waited. I waited for the yes, no phone call. And then, one day, your phone rings. And in this case, it was actually Sunny Williams, who's right now up on the International Space Station. So when an astronaut calls you, and I just remember being there, and she says, sorry, we didn't select you. And you feel that childhood dream that was so close suddenly slipping away. And you think to yourself, oh, I wasn't good enough. I need to make myself better. And I started to think, all right, I will go and get another degree in space sciences. I'll go get my advanced scuba. I'll go and I'll get my commercial pilot's license, and thinking about how do I turn my life upside down to chase what I thought I needed to be in order to go to space. And I was tearing myself up inside because it had slipped through my fingers. And then I paused and said, wait, maybe I'm thinking about this the wrong way. A lot of times we get opportunities and they don't work out, or we get that no, and that level of disappointment basically crushes us. Nobody likes the no, but sometimes you have to flip the script. Instead of being so disappointed that I wasn't a NASA astronaut, I decided that I would celebrate the fact that I was almost a NASA astronaut. I mean, I got down, thank you. I got down to less than 1% of the application process. And that was worth celebrating instead of being disappointed in myself. And what I did was I realized when I flipped the script and said, wow, I was almost a NASA astronaut, everything changed about that year. I could look back and be like, man, I got to do some amazing testing. I got to meet amazing astronauts. And I got this really awesome medical. That's actually my brain right there. Does it look like me? They told me I was grossly normal. That's what the medical diagnosis, grossly normal. I'm like, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But to be able to flip that script and be like celebrating this year of my life really enabled me to move forward in this new positive way. And I went and I decided that if I couldn't be a NASA astronaut up there helping to advance human spaceflight, I would become an analog astronaut down here on Earth helping to advance human spaceflight. So I started living in Moon and Mars simulations and really just volunteering my time and my energy and my knowledge in this new type of space that's helping to prepare us for the Moon and Mars. And so you can see in 2013, I did my first analog. The High Seas Habitat, which is in the picture there, opened in 2013. And I lived in it. I was part of the very first crew to live in the High Seas Habitat. I lived in it for 4 months, funded by NASA to investigate food strategies for long-duration space flights. And so I was going and doing these analogs, and you can see my last one was in 2020. 2020. Yeah, we all know what 2020 was. I was in a High Seas Habitat, and I got out of it in January 2020. Right. Now, if you do the math, you know that I was born in 1970. So 2020 was a big year for me because I was turning 50 in March. So I came out of the High Seas Habitat like, yeah, this is awesome, getting ready for my 50th birthday, thinking everything's great. And then what happened in March of 2020? Global pandemic lockdown and turning 50. And so now the world found ourselves kind of like analog astronauts, confined and isolated in our houses. If we go outside, we have to wear a mask, almost like, wearing a spacesuit going outside. And a way in which we cope with uncertainty and change. And one of the things that I had learned from being an analog astronaut is that when I'm in isolated, confined situations, it's when my creativity comes out. And some of you might have found the same thing during the pandemic. Raise your hand if you became an awesome sourdough baker during the pandemic. You were like, yeah, right? Or raise your hand if you picked up a musical instrument during the pandemic, or that you took on something new and creative that you'd never done before. Our creativity is something that we can control. So when we're in this crazy environment, we can tap into that as a resource. And so for me, I became a space artist and a poet during the pandemic, not knowing that 9 months later, it would win me a seat to space. And so that creativity. And then, we get to 1 year, not quite 1 year into the pandemic. February 2021 Super Bowl. Does anybody remember watching the Super Bowl on that day? Raise your hand if you watched the Super Bowl, okay? A couple of people. Now, raise your hand if you remember the Inspiration 4 commercial during there. We've got a couple of people who, I think everybody was shocked. I didn't watch the Super Bowl, but my phone started blowing up. You can win a seat to space. You just got to donate to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. You can win a seat to space. And I was like, what? What is this Inspiration 4? And then I thought, oh, I can do that. I can donate to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. But what people didn't realize was that there wasn't just one seat up for grabs. There were 2 seats that they were giving away to anyone. Anyone could apply. And so for me, I donated to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital to try to win a generosity seat, but then there was a second seat called the prosperity seat. Now, the prosperity seat took a little more work. You had to do 2 things in order to win the prosperity seat. One, you had to open up a shop on Jared's platform. You had to show that you were an entrepreneur because he got started as an entrepreneur. That's how he became a successful business person. So he wanted to represent that. So you had to offer something. And I thought, oh, I just become an artist. I'll start selling my art online. And then the second thing you had to do was you had to create a 2-minute Twitter video expressing why you should be chosen to go to space. I want you to think about that now. Think about the one thing that you've ever wanted to do in life, whether it's go to space or anything, your dream. And if you had to create a 2-minute video expressing why you should be chosen to have that dream come true, what would you say about yourself? What would you want people to know about you so that they choose you and not the person next to you? That's what I found myself in that situation in February of 2021. And I thought to myself, I had just found my authentic voice as an artist and a poet. And so I chose to create a poem. I wrote an original poem called Space to Inspire. And I read that poem as my video entry for the Inspiration 4 Prosperity Seat contest. Would you like to hear my poem? Yes. Wait, would you like to hear my poem? Yes. This is the poem that won me a seat to space via Twitter. Can't make that up, right? Via Twitter. All right. You've got space. I've got space. We all have space to inspire. That's why we dream of going higher and higher. But what is space if you can't breathe? Let's stop sucking out the air of our humanity. We have a moment to seize the light. Earth from space, both day and night. We have J for justice to ignite the bold. We have E for equity to cut past the old. We have D for diversity to end the fight. We have I for inclusion to try to make it right. A Jedi space to rally behind, a universal force so big it binds, inspiration to change the world, a new beginning for us to hold. It's not about you, it's not about me, it's about space to inspire for all of humanity. science, technology, engineering, and math, sending us out on the explorer's path. But don't forget the arts, the heartbeat of time. Consider sending a poet who knows how to rhyme. So let us drop the mic and close the capsule door. But please make sure Dr. Proctor is on board. My space to inspire is what we need. Inspiration for all of humanity. So I wrote that poem, and I read that as my entry for the prosperity seat. And in my head, I was thinking, about the future narrative that we get to create. And my dad, the thing that I loved most about my dad was him instilling this love of science fiction in me. We watched Star Wars and Star Trek. And when I think about, that Jedi space, it's a Star Wars acronym with that Star Trek meaning for us to boldly go together. And I put this video up, and then you had to show that you could go viral. I put this video up literally 3 days before the contest ended. And I rallied Twitter, and in 3 days we got 70,000 views. And then a week later, I was told to get on a Zoom call, and there was Jared Isaacman. Jared doesn't mess around. He was like, we picked the winner, and it's you. And I was like, what? And then he said, the next thing out of his mouth was literally, and I want you to be my mission pilot. And I thought, in my head, does he know I've only flown a Cessna 172? Cessna, Dragon capsule, how hard can it be? But it just kind of shook my head and said, yeah, okay, this is good, yeah, sure. How many of you followed the Inspiration 4 mission? Okay, a handful of you did. For those of you that didn't, this was Inspiration 4, and this is what I won.
The reason I started SpaceX was to get humanity to Mars. We want to try to make the dream of space accessible to anyone, and ultimately making science fiction not fiction forever.
What they're about to do will change the game entirely. 4 civilians are going to space. They will orbit the Earth for 3 days.
On their own.
My dream of always wanting to go to space. I wanted to let you know that I got selected.
They start telling me about this all-civilian mission to space.
How many astronauts are going? And that's when she said, none. Haley was diagnosed with bone cancer.
I haven't died, and I'm not going to die. Having cancer made me who I am. My dream is to be a nurse. I'm getting to show them what their life can look like after cancer. If I can do it, you can definitely do it.
I went upstairs after the phone call, though, and told my wife, I think I'm gonna ride a rocket. And she just, what?
I don't think I'll think about the worldly impact this mission is going to have until Chris is back on the ground.
I'm like, why would they choose me? Look at that. But my dad had instilled this idea in me that I could do anything.
I'm commander of Inspiration 4. No matter what, I'm a father first, and that comes with a great deal of responsibility.
What is the speed?
25 times the speed of sound, or 17,500 miles an hour.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's getting real.
Our mission to space had to serve a bigger purpose, which is why it's a $200 million fundraising campaign for the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital.
There have been 3 Black female American astronauts who have made it to space. I will be number 4.
Start thinking about what could happen and the risks that are involved.
These people are you and me, and they will kick the doors open to space for the rest of us.
This is where we're gonna live for 3 days.
Home sweet home.
Now, I know a lot of you are thinking about the fact that my commander, Jared Isaacman, was nominated to become the new NASA administrator. And I just want to kind of put context of, my flight into perspective. Jared is a very successful business person, but I can't think of any billionaire who would actively choose to do a couple of things. One, go into space for 3 days, living in a tiny capsule for 3 days in space, most dangerous thing you can do, and voluntarily give the seats away to complete strangers. That's what Jared did. Next, he reached out to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital and said 2 things. One, I'm going to do the largest fundraiser in your history to try to help end childhood cancer. A $200 million fundraiser. And 2, I want to fly a childhood cancer survivor. That's Haley Arsenault. She was gifted the Hope seat. When Haley was 10 years old, she was diagnosed with bone cancer in her leg. St. Jude Children's Research Hospital saved her life. It made such an impact on her that she grew up and became a physician's assistant working at St. Jude. She's still there today, working. She never thought she would ever have the opportunity to fly to space. Because of Jared, she got that opportunity. Then the other 2 seats, he gave away to random people via contests. Chris Simbrowski won the generosity seat by donating to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And then, of course, I won the prosperity seat as an artist and a poet. And in March of 2021, 4 complete strangers came together and began training to go to space for 3 days, all because of Jared. And so we went off and we did crew cohesion and zero-G and all the things that NASA astronauts would do to get trained to go to space, including fighter jets. And I spent a lot of time with Jared at Hawthorne, SpaceX headquarters, in the simulator as his mission pilot, going over emergencies and contingencies and learning. I had to go from being a geoscience community college professor to being a mission pilot of a Dragon spacecraft in 6 months. But Jared had the confidence, along with SpaceX, that they could get me flight ready. And so you can imagine coming together and people bonding and becoming a crew. And in that time, what was really awesome about SpaceX and working with them is that the Dragon capsule was designed to go to the International Space Station and take NASA astronauts there and back. And so normally you would dock up at the top to the ISS. But we, for the first time, were doing what was called an Earth orbit free flyer mission. So we were not docking to the International Space Station. So SpaceX said, how would you like the largest continuous window ever flown to space? And we were like, that sounds great. And so they put the cupola, they designed and put the cupola on top of the Dragon capsule so that we would have the opportunity to see the Earth from that amazing perspective. And so when you're thinking about the fact that you've trained with these amazing individuals for the past 6 months, and now it's your time.
Went up a flight of stairs.
That was supposed to not have sound, but that's okay. And now it's your turn to walk down the jetway and get into your capsule and leave the Earth. So Haley and I, Inspiration 4 had 4 different decades. Haley was in her 20s. Jared was in his 30s, Chris Simbrowski was in his 40s, and I was the oldest individual at 50, in my 50s, going to space. And Haley and I became really close. So thinking about how space can create opportunity for different generations to come together and form this unique bond. And so we became really good friends, her as the youngest crew member and me as the oldest crew member, about to lift off. And then you come to that moment where you're strapped in the capsule. This is a screenshot from the live stream. It's 14 minutes to takeoff. And Jared Isaacman is in the left seat as the Inspiration 4 commander, and that is me in the right seat as the mission pilot. The number one question that I get when I tell people that I'm an astronaut and I went to space is, when I was strapped into the Dragon capsule on top of that Falcon 9 rocket and it's counting down to 0, was I afraid? Was I afraid to go? Think about this. Would you be afraid to go? And you're like, yeah. Oh, I'd be. And then you know what my answer is? Every time. No. I was ready. Imagine you're sitting in the Dragon capsule and the clock is ticking down to 0. And everyone you know and love is there watching as your childhood dream is becoming a reality.
And it has been an absolute honor to prepare you for this historic flight. Today, you are truly inspiring the world. I wish you a great mission, good luck, Godspeed, and enjoy the ride.
We launched on September 15th, 2021, 8 p.m., just after sunset. Kennedy Space Center, Launch Pad 39A, the same launch pad that sent the Apollo astronauts to the moon. And as our Falcon 9 rocket came to life and began lifting off of the pad, it literally turned night into day. And then, as you all know, being in the space industry, 10 minutes later, you're in space. I think most people are shocked when I tell them, yeah, 10 minutes. How long did it take you to get to space? You know, the average person, they're like, how long? I'm like, 10 minutes. They're like, oh, wow. And a lot of times people ask me, well, you were up there for 3 days. What was the most amazing moment? And it's hard because there are so many amazing moments, but this is by far one of my top moments because it's when we're gonna open the forward hatch and we're gonna look through this beautiful cupola at our planet Earth for the first time. Now, you're not gonna see me in this video because I'm filming it, because I'm like, we gotta document this. This is a moment. And so I got my iPhone and I'm recording this, and I want you to watch Haley's face. Because Haley has a job to do. She's gonna start pulling out this white ribbon. She's gonna be floating there and a white ribbon all around her. And her job is to protect the forward hatch from damage by putting this white ribbon around it. But there's gonna be a moment when when Haley looks up and she sees the Earth for the first time, and watch the expression on her face. And also the music. So my crew members didn't know this, but I downloaded special music for this occasion. So as I started recording, I hit play on my iPad. So the music you're going to hear was playing in real time in space. I think you'll appreciate it.
Oh my gosh.
gosh.
I love that moment and that expression, and that was Jared. Oh, holy shit. Jared was like, oh my God, we were all like, what is this? And you could see how, as we pulled back the forward hatch, all of this light flooded into our capsule. And a lot of times people talk about the overview effect, and that being able to see the Earth from that orbital perspective, and they ask me, did that change you? And I say yes. But it changed me in a way that they don't expect. Because when I was up there in low Earth orbit, what I realized was that I was being bathed in Earthlight. Earthlight. Think about this. We learn about sunlight, we learn about moonlight, but nobody talks about Earthlight. All of the light on my face, that's all Earthlight, none of it's sunlight. Our planet is stunningly beautiful from space. And to be able to go up there and to have this moment and discover Earthlight for myself truly transformed me in a way that made me, I'm a geoscience professor. I know that the Earth has a high reflectivity, but I didn't realize just how beautiful our planet is from low Earth orbit. And that opportunity for people to go up and experience Earthlight for themselves and be transformed by that experience. That was the biggest gift given to me by going to space and becoming an astronaut. We also did a lot of medical stuff while we were up there for 3 days. So there's a picture of me timing a medical experiment, and that's Haley with the butterfly ultrasound. We were looking at our eyeballs, our interjugular veins, our bladders, helping to advance human spaceflight while we were up there for those 3 days as private citizens, commercial astronauts. But for me, SpaceX asked me, is there anything that I want to do? And one of the big things as an artist and a poet was I said, yeah, I want to paint in space. You can imagine they were like, wait, what? Painting in space, you know? But I said, NASA astronauts have led the way. Nicole Stott did a beautiful watercolor while she was in space, one of my sheroes. And once I said that, they said, we will figure this out. So I painted and drew that picture while on orbit. My crew members and SpaceX gave me the time and the space to do that. But even more dear to my heart is that I got to bring my dad's Neil Armstrong autograph to space with me. My dad passed away when I was 19 years old. He was just 48. He died from cancer. He never got to see me become the person that I am today and to achieve that childhood dream that he instilled in me that I could do this. But I got to bring that Neil Armstrong autograph with me and float it to remember my family. And then after 3 days, it's time to come home. We splashed just off the coast of Florida. It was the first time since the shuttle that there was a sonic boom by a spacecraft over Florida announcing Inspiration 4 was coming home. And I remember when we splashed down, you brace for impact, you hit the water, and I could feel it. I could feel it, that phoenix rising moment, that moment when that weight is lifted off of your shoulders. Because not only did we have a successful mission, but I became the first Black woman to pilot a spaceship. And for me, that was so important, to be able to show other people, women of color, that they could go off and have and be a part of this and could do this. And so then they hoist you up onto the back of, the SpaceX ship. And I remember the moment when they open up the hatch and you got to get out of the capsule. Now, Anil Menon, who's now a NASA astronaut, is the one who was the SpaceX was the SpaceX flight doctor for our mission. So Anil comes into the capsule and he's like, you guys, you okay? You okay? Can you get out on your own? Do you want us to carry you out? I'm like, Anil, the world's watching, right? Because SpaceX live streams everything. I'm like, Anil, I got this. Are you kidding me? I just came back from space. I got this.
Here comes Dr. Sian Proctor.
There she is, excited as ever. Dr. Sian Proctor. Oh, I love it. Love it.
Just strung on down.
I know, no problem at all.
I was like, I'm dancing. I did it. I'm coming back. I was so happy. We were so happy because there were people who thought SpaceX was crazy, that Jared was crazy. We were the 4th ever human space flight launch for SpaceX. They did May 2020, Bob and Doug demo 2. That fall, they did Crew 1. That in April, they did Crew 2. That's 3 flights, all NASA astronauts. And then they said, yeah, we can chuck 4 civilians into space for 3 days. And then it splashed down and have that success. But when you get back to Earth, now that you've packed for space, you've got to unpack Earth. And I recognize those who trailblazed the way for me. Dr. Mae Jemison, first black woman to fly to space, did it when I was 22 years old. And thinking about that legacy of becoming the 4th African-American woman to make it to space, and why that matters is that you show a path for others to believe that they can go too, that they can make it, that they have something that they can strive for. But my family tree, my space family tree doesn't stop. It doesn't start with Dr. Mae Jemison, I should say. It actually goes back further to Bessie Coleman. How many of you guys know who Bessie Coleman is? Raise your hand. She is the first African-American woman to get her pilot's license. She did that in 1921 during segregation in the United States. She couldn't get her pilot's license in the United States because of that. She had to teach herself French and go to France in order to become a pilot, because when she saw aviation, it made her dream that she could do that too, and to trailblaze the way. Because of her courage and determination, she's now in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. And 100 years later, in 2021, I became the first black woman to pilot a spaceship. And she helped break that barrier down 100 years earlier to believe that we can be a part of this. And as a result, now I'm so happy to say that at the end of this year, my spacesuit is going on display at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. You know, we always say that we're creating space for all, but are we really creating space for all? We have to actively push ourselves to create space for all. And as an industry, I believe that we are doing this. We are striving for that Star Trek generation, that just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive space for all of humanity. And as we're doing that, that message for the world is that as we solve for space, we are solving for Earth. That should say solving for space, not space for space. It's solving for space equals solving for Earth. And as we go to the moon and Mars and we take on these really tough challenges, they talked about it in the panel before me, we don't know how to live continuously on the moon and then do that on Mars. But as we do that, all that innovation is here, being spun off to make us more sustainable. And that's exciting. And we get to take ownership of the fact that we are creating a future that is sustainable for planet Earth. And when we do that, when we open up space for all and think about how solving for space is solving for Earth, we can do it in ways that create that just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive space. In the last 4 years, commercial space has flown the youngest individual at 18, the oldest individual at 92. If you don't know Ed Dwight's story, look up Ed Dwight. It is amazing. And everything in between. All of you that raised your hand and said, I want to go to space. That can be a reality if we all choose to make access to space truly for everyone. In this photo, the 100th woman to fly to space. Only 100 women have flown to space. Emily Calandrelli is there. The first woman from Egypt and the first woman from the continent of Africa, Sarah Sabre, is in that photo, flew to space. The first Vietnamese woman is in that photo. She's slated to go to space this year. And as we open up space for all of these amazing individuals bring their culture and their heritage and the hope to the next generation that they too can reach for the stars. And so I want to thank you for taking a moment to listen to my Space to Inspire story. And as you go out there and do the things that you're doing to help advance space, I want you to think about the fact that you as an individual, the fact that you're using your space to inspire not only yourself, but those around you and people that you may never even see. You're helping to create space to inspire. So as you do that, let your Earthlight shine, and remember that when we're solving for space, we're solving for Earth. And you can help represent that by supporting the design that I created specifically for SpaceCom. Thank you.